place appropriate measures and safeguards to minimize the potential impact on the financial sector and to ensure that financial stability is preserved. Specifically, the Bank of Ghana, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the National Insurance Commission, and the National Pensions Regulatory Authority would ensure that the impact of the debt operation on your financial institution is minimized using all regulatory tools available to them. Secondly, a financial stability fund is being established by government with the help of development partners to provide liquidity support to banks, pension funds, insurance companies, fund managers, and collective investment schemes to ensure that they are able to meet their obligations to their clients as they fall due. These are difficult times, and we count on the support of all Ghanaians and the investor community to make this exercise successful. We are confident that these measures will contribute to restoring macroeconomic stability. With your understanding and support and that of the entire investor community, we shall overcome our current difficulties. Our commitment to Ghanaians and the investor community, in line with negotiations with the IMF, is to restore macroeconomic stability in the shortest possible time and enable investors to realize the benefits of this debt exchange. The government of Ghana has been working hard to minimize the impact of the domestic debt exchange on investors holding government bonds, particularly small investors, individuals, and other vulnerable groups. In line with this, Treasury bills are completely exempted and all holders will be paid the full value of their investments on maturity. There will be no haircut on the principal of bonds. Individual holders of bonds will also not be affected. The government recognizes that our financial institutions hold a substantial proportion of these bonds. As such, the potential impact of this exchange on the financial sector has been assessed by their respective regulators. Our domestic debt operation involves an exchange for new Ghana bonds with a coupon that steps up to 10% as soon as 2025, with zero interest in 2023, and a first interest payment in 2024, and longer average maturity for the bonds. Existing domestic bonds as of 1st December 2022 will be exchanged for a set of 4 new bonds maturing in 2027, 2029, 2032, and 2037. Predetermined allocation ratios are as follows: 17% for the short bonds, 17% for the intermediate bonds, 25% for the medium-term bonds, and 41% for the long-term bonds. The annual coupon on all these new bonds will be set, as I mentioned, as 0% in 2023, 5% in 2024, and 10% from 2025 until maturity. Coupon payments will be semi-annual. For emphasis, this domestic debt exchange program will not affect individual bondholders.
Therefore, the Trade Union Congress and all its affiliate national unions have decided that pension funds of our members will not be part of the domestic debt exchange program.
He added it is insensitive for government to announce increment in taxes, including income tax, in such a difficult time.
In the budget, government announced various IMF-inspired measures to deal with the economic and financial crisis, some of which are clearly inappropriate and wrong. And they include the following. Number one, taxation. Government has announced increases in taxes starting from January 2023 in this current economic situation. And you know what they touched? VAT, which is indirect consumption tax, affects everybody equally, whether you are poor or you are rich. And the value added tax rate is projected to go up by 2.5 percentage points. But if you work percentage points, it's getting to about 14% increase.
And that is how we kickstart our big stories. We're focusing, of course, on the Trades Union Congress and how they are declining to participate in government's debt exchange program. You saw there Dr. Yao Ba, Secretary General of the outfit, at that presser or that engagement yesterday. So we asked, what is the way forward? What will be the implications if the TUC continues down this road, maintains its stance? How will that impact engagement with the IMF for a program? And could this withdrawal, so to speak, if the TUC remains adamant, affect the fortunes of the debt exchange program, which is an imperative, as we've come to know it, for an IMF deal? Well, we contemplate all of these issues this morning with our guests. Professor Lord Mensah is an economist at the University of Ghana Business School. We also have Boakye Yadom Amponsa, a labor consultant, joining the conversation. But right here with me, joining the conversation, Bernice Abu-Baidoo, Lansah. Hello, Bernice.
Hello, Benjamin. How are you?
I'm okay. I'd like to find out from you. I don't know whether you followed when I interacted this morning with Kojopoku, energy analyst, but he shared his thoughts on this and felt that, it's really not going to impact them in that way. Of course, we know that the principal will not be affected. It's the interest rollover that is going to create problems. But the stance of the TUC could mean that, just imagine, the TUC is big. Their pensions are involved. SNIT and others would come into the fray. How could this, from where you say it, how problematic could it be?
Well, it all depends on how it's managed, doesn't it? I mean, we've heard from Labour complaining that they were not consulted. Could it have changed what we are seeing today if they were spoken to prior to this?
Solid point.
I want to believe so, but once again, we'll see what happens later today. We've been told that at 10 a.m., the Finance Ministry and the IMF will be organizing a press conference, giving us details on how far we've gone in our bid to get that support from the IMF. So we wait to see how all that plays into this. But let's now bring in our guests. Let me start with you, Professor Lord Mensah. Thanks once again for joining the program. This is where we are. At this point, the TUC is saying that we aren't going to back down. In fact, we are hearing there will be a possible strike if government doesn't heed what they refer to as their demand. What do you think we should be doing at this point, considering that we have reps from the IMF in town? We are going to be hearing from them later at 10 a.m. What exactly should be the way forward?
It's a matter of, respecting contracts. Bond in itself is a contract. The government meeting maybe fund managers or regulatory authorities of pensions and all those might not necessarily mean that they've met the people who are investing through these pension institutions. We need to understand that the entire economy is built on, lattice or structures of contracts, and it must be respected. Let me put it that way. I always say that this exercise that the government is calling for, which is the debt exchange program, it is an exercise that we may have to look at the benefit aspect of the exercise and look at the cost side of the exercise. I can tell you that the benefit is to free up fiscal space, on the balance sheet of the public, so that government can be relaxed in its, in its activities, making more money available for government to do other businesses. That's the benefit. But then if you look at the cost will be that, one, investors are going to have their investment or their pensions proceeds or yields deferred, over a longer period. Another thing will be that, the trust in the financial system may be lost. And so we have to work out in such a way that the cost will not outweigh the benefit. Because if the cost turns out to, outweigh the benefit, the direct consequence in the economy is going to be unbearable.
Yeah, but at this point, sorry to interject, at this point, what are you seeing if you put the two on a scale? Does it appear?
What I see is more of, creating cost, because you're going to get those at the granular level indicating that they have not been consulted. And we should understand that these institutions are just mediating on behalf of these people. And they are the majority. If you meet the front lines, that is the pension institutions and all those, you've not done enough. And I think after meeting the pension institutions and the heads and the regulatory authorities, I don't know the information or the kind of conversation that transpired. I was expecting that these institutions and then the regulatory authorities who are representing the people of Ghana would transfer the kind of discussion they had with the finance minister to the people. So that the teacher who is sitting at my village somewhere contributing his pensions will understand that, look, this is what is happening. We are all in an economic situation that is difficult. We may have to sacrifice. But my question that I ask the government is that, what is the government himself exchanging for this debt exchange? Let me put it in simple terms. What is the government himself exchanging for this debt exchange? It's about negotiations, coming to the table, allowing the people to understand that, this is an economic times that if we don't manage it carefully, you are likely to lose your pensions completely. And as a result of that, these are the proposed structures we're putting across. Maybe 0% of your pension yields next year, 5%, the following year, and then thereafter, 10% on levels, throughout, to maturity. These are the people's investment. And the people's investment means that you have a contract between you, the government, and the people. So you must respect that contract. And if you don't respect that contract, you may go ahead with the exercise. I don't know the announcement they're coming to give us in your introduction. You indicated that the IMF and then the finance ministry will come out with a presser. But I can tell you that if they go ahead to do this, we're going to lose trust in the economy. And I can tell you the consequence is going to be that. At the end of the day, people will struggle to send their money to these financial institutions. And as a result of that, they may want to invest in things that they can control themselves. Maybe going into farms, going to other things that are closely. And remember, the Treasury bill is an alternative now. It's available. And I wasn't surprised yesterday they got an oversubscription of the issues that were coming up. So effectively, it tells you that the investor is gradually bringing their investment from long-term to short-term in a way to have control over that kind of investment. If the Treasury bill also fails, then they may want to sleep on their money in their houses. So effectively, we have to be careful how we go about this, exercise. But my question that I raised earlier, which I said, okay, what is the government exchanging for this debt exchange? We all know that it is an exercise that we need as an economy to have the economy on its footing again. But then the other thing is government ready to sacrifice its part? The expenditure lines that are being called out, that the government should cut expenditure in areas that are not necessary. How ready is the government, to do that? On the other hand, what is the promise or the assurance that if we go ahead with this debt exchange and we are able to free up, a space where government will not have interest obligations on bonds the next year, that is zero coupon payment next year, what would the money be used for? Would the government come into contract with these pensions, those who have contributed their pensions? Will the government come into contract with citizens and indicate how they're going to use the money prudently for Ghanaians to benefit the kind of exercise that we're going through, so that it will not be a kind of pain that we are taking now, but then at the end of the day, the benefit will not be realized, or the impact of the benefit will not be realized. And if we should go by history and how we have spent our way into, debt accumulations, for which at the end of the day we have to end up doing debt restructuring, I can tell you that history does not support the kind of, sacrifice that the government must do. So it's about time the government comes to the round table with the citizens or trades union and then indicate to them, these are the possible consequences if we don't go through this exercise. However, I'm coming into terms with you that whatever proceeds that will be accrued from this exercise, we're going to use it for this purpose. And I can tell you that accountability, that should be a bond. It should be an agreement between the trades union and then all those who are contributing their pensions, not pensions alone, investors, and to the large extent, the citizenry, that this exercise is a pain that the citizens are going to take. And out of this pain, you're going to benefit in the future. And the benefit is going to be that whatever will be accrued out of this exercise, we're going to invest it in this line, at this area, and therefore it will turn up to be a benefit to you yourself. So effectively, that is what I'm expecting. And I think, we are all human beings and we understand the dynamics of every economy. I think if the government should come to the round table and such discussions should go on, possibly renegotiation on the interest payment. If the government feels, okay, next year, zero payment, will be too harsh for the trades union, they can negotiate and bring some rates, to next year, and then the following year they continue in that manner. Prof, I believe it's a matter of, coming to the round table.
Right. Let me, at this point, acknowledge Mr. Ken Trinibua-Kodia, Vice Chairman of the TUC. He's joined the program. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll be coming to you shortly with our questions. But let me come on this follow-up with you, Prof. The TUC is basically saying, you know what? You can run your debt exchange program, but exempt our pensions from it. Can government come to that compromise? Is it a possibility, or will it affect the program largely?
Well, if you look at the Pensions Regulatory Act and the guidelines that the pensions are supposed to, pension investment are supposed to go through, you can realize that a chunk of their investments are with the government. And if government should exempt pensions, then the exercise shouldn't have gone on anyway.
Right.
So effectively, the kind of weight when it comes to the contributions to government bonds investment, the pensions are so high. And so it's a matter of, negotiations and looking at how, the parties involved, can benefit. And then we can have, this exercise going on.
Right. So I asked that question as a premise to my conversation with Mr. Trinibua-Kodia. So we've heard, in other words, Mr. Kodia, the TUC and your affiliates are asking government to rethink the debt exchange program, because asking it to exempt pension funds means then that, the program as it is now may not succeed. What is the compromise that the TUC is also willing to reach? We've heard some of the suggestions from Professor Lord Mensah, but are you at any point willing to reach any compromise with government about this?
Thank you very much, and a good morning to my colleagues on the panel. Obviously, TUC has always demonstrated its willingness to cooperate to build this country. An institution that is over 75 years old, without issues, obviously has shown that it's always ready to assist. But let's put the facts quite bare. If government fails to engage, what stopped government from the beginning? From engaging labor and say that, labor, you have this amount of money that I want to structure this way, that it obviously would have contributed. What has happened is a disregard to organized labor, it doesn't show good governance in getting this issue resolved. And we are leaders not unto ourselves, but unto members. And when you see an evident danger ahead, and the party involved is not willing to sit down with you to discuss, let you understand the issue, so you contribute. Obviously, you have to take the stance that seeks to also protect the interest of the people you are leading.
So, Mr. Kodia, there are reports that TUC is unwilling to meet government. Just clarify that for us. We know what your stance is. Government didn't engage you prior to this announcement, but has there been any effort to discuss, to negotiate this over these terms?
As at this morning, we have not received any invitation from the government on this issue. As at yesterday, when we had a press conference, there has not been any invitation to trade union to discuss this issue.
But my question to you is, are you willing to reach a certain compromise? As we heard from Prof, exempting the pensions from this whole debt exchange program means that it cannot run as has been announced. So are you willing to reach a certain compromise, or do you have certain terms that you are willing to go by if the pensions should be touched?
Well, we have our doubts whether exempting pension income would cause this whole debt restructuring not to run. That we have to really interrogate. The amount of pension income in this debt must be really looked at. We are always ready to talk, but let me say this. For how long must we sit down and let IMF issues always come to choke the ordinary worker? See, currently, as we speak, you know what inflation has done to our income. I mean, the workers' income. All the worker is seeking to do is to save some money now so he has some income during retirement. Government on its own is not supporting workers enough to enhance retirement income. So on our own, we are saving enough to secure our retirement income. That is the least government can do for workers. If you're not increasing salaries to commensurate the level of inflation, you are not securing the pension of the worker, and he's doing this on his own. Why do you kill him? Stab him in the heart, and also in the it's quite unacceptable.
Respectfully, Mr. Kodia, but back to my question: do you have certain terms that you are willing to agree to when it comes to pensions in relating to the debt exchange program? Is there a certain compromise you're willing to take as organized labor?
Compromise is always a good thing when parties sit down to discuss issues. When parties are not sitting down and one is imposing, it makes it quite difficult. But we have made it quite clear that our pension income is a no-no. We will not allow our pension income to be part of this debt restructuring. If government is willing to sit down with organized labor to look at other options, perhaps in raising money, we've seen VAT being increased by 2.5 percentage points, right?
Yes.
Now, is it the case that we can get GR?
Hello, Mr. Kodia. Hello, Mr. Kodia, can you hear me? Oh, too bad, we've lost him. Let me bring Mr. Boachi Yadomampon. So you are the labor expert. Clearly, we are seeing here a problem with governance. Labor is upset that government didn't consult it prior to making this announcement. As we sit this morning, we are being told that there's been no engagement whatsoever. There's been no invitation for an engagement. Could this spell doom for government's debt exchange program, seeing the stance of the TUC? Kindly unmute your device, Mr. Iyadom. Hello?
Right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right. Good morning, and let me say good morning to my other participants as well, and your cherished listeners. I think, in the first place, the government shouldn't have contemplated this without proper engagement. Actually, don't forget that for the union, it's a welfare society, okay? They seek the welfare of their members. And for them to sit down and you to push this down their throats, it's a no-no. It will never be accepted. I wonder why they decided to talk to the regulatory bodies without actually talking to such blocks like the TUC. Because if you're going to touch pensions, then you know the kind of, the constituency that you are going to deal with. So what do you look out to? You look out for the leadership. Have a chat with them. This is a good faith exercise. If you force it down their throat, certainly they won't accept it, because when they go down to the rank and file, to their membership, they should be in a position to explain the rudiments, the principles, and everything with them, okay? And they can only do that if they understand what is on the table. So for me, I think we shouldn't delay in the engagement process. My advice to government would be that issue an invitation to TUC today, have a discussion with them this morning, and then you can go ahead with whatever you are doing with IMF, and then progress with your discussions going forward.
But it's it's quite complicated. We are being told that at 10 a.m. this morning, there's going to be an announcement from government and the IMF. I doubt that government will be able to meet Labour prior to that. Seeing that these two parties, I mean government and Labour, appear to be all fixed in their stance, and how critical this will be to the success of the debt exchange program. And that's why I asked, could this spell doom for us?
That is if government fails to engage. You see, the position of the trade union, they are always, negotiating. Whatever they tell you has the face of negotiation in a way. What they've said is to tell you that come to the table and let's have a discussion. I don't think that being part of this economy, it will be even in their interest to derail this process. I don't think so. So the statement they put out there is, for me, is like an invitation to government to come to the table. So they should take it like that. And meetings are normally fixed and postponed all the time. So if you realize that you've not done your preparation very well, what do? They can shift this meeting to the afternoon, meet the TUC this morning. Anytime you call them, they will go. Meet the TUC this morning, have some level of understanding before you go into your meeting with IMF.
Professor Mensah, let me start with you, Benjamin here. I just need to ask, because these are 500,000 strong when you look at the TUC. But they are not approaching this individually because their pension funds are locked up with SNIT, and you can also, some will bring in the TS2 and 3. What could be the consequences if the TUC remains, I don't want to say intransigent because that would be negative, but adamant on their position? What could be the consequences? In other words, do we need to do this in order to secure an IMF program? Prof.
Yeah, I think, you see, the IMF, let me push that, we respond to whether do we have to go through this exercise to secure an IMF program or not. IMF's position has always been that they don't support countries that are in distress. So when IMF engages you, they look at the possibilities and then your expenditure lines and the ones that you can easily free up. Then they can, come in. But clearly, if you look at the government expenditure lines, you cannot easily touch salaries, right? And if you talk about, capital expenditure, the interest payment relative to the capital expenditure, I think the interest payment outweighs, the capex. hugely, and then goods and services as well. So what is weighing the Ghanaian, budget every now and then is the interest payment. Salaries you cannot touch for the purpose of production. And of course, if you should touch salary, you're going to get the same TUC coming up again, reactive. So obviously, it's going to be the interest payment. But then there is a communication gap. And the communication gap is that at this time, we should have gotten the regulator, that is the pensions regulator, coming up to tell us the possible exposures. As we're speaking now, we are not conversant with the numbers as to the possible exposures as far as this, debt restructuring or debt exchange is concerned. I can tell you that if the various pension institutions come up and then look at the kind of investment they have done, apply the various actuarial and finance models to tell Ghanaians that this is our likely exposure, I think possibly the TUC might have realized that the exposure could be minimal. But then, if you look at the pensions regulatory, investment limit by the various pension institutions, investment into government bonds is unlimited. There was no boundary as far as government bonds are concerned. And I don't know how the pensions the pension institutions have been investing over the years. Some may have concentrated so highly as far as government bonds are concerned, which we know very well that it's part of what risky investment that you can have your money into, depending on their skill set and the kind of investment skills that they have.
Right.
So effectively, I can tell you that yes, indeed, without limitation, some of the pensions, fund managers can go extreme as far as investment in this government bonds is concerned. So I think it's about time we get the information from the regulator,
right,
telling us that in aggregation, this is going to be the likely exposure. So if government says, I'm not paying interest on bonds next year, the income that they used to enjoy on bonds, which was about 20.1% coupon payment, that income will not come in next year. Right. Would that be enough to say that, okay, fine, the obligations that these pensions institutions have, would they be able to satisfy them? The following year, they're going to receive 5% of their, principal. That 5%, would they be able to offset the, obligations that will come the next year? Thereafter, they're going to receive 10%, till, 2037.
Right.
Would that be enough to, satisfy the obligations or the possible retirements that will come up, over the years? Now, let's also understand that the pensions had invested, in the past, and they've accumulated income.
Right.
The income may not be monies that they've exhausted all of them. They may have reserves. So it's about time they come, and then we do all the numbers, jumble them together. The benefit that they've enjoyed over the years, how would they be able to offset the possible reduction in interest rate going forward? So,
but of course, Prof, so sorry to interject, but of course, these are conversations we've had. The problem being that, of course, if they have a buffer interest that has accrued over the years, it's not meant to just be expended anyhow, because situations may arise, maybe this is one of them, where some of that would be used to defray other costs. But when you look at the fact that principals aren't going to be affected, it is just interest payments that are going to be affected. Is the TUC in any sort of error when it comes forth saying things like, if government refuses to accede to our demand, we will advise ourselves, and this is only going to worsen our plight and further plunge us into unimaginable hardship, and all of that, basically threatening industrial action? Is it within their rights from where you sit? Because individuals are not being targeted here. It is everybody who falls into the category.
Yeah, so what I see is that I'm not an expert in labor, and at the same time, I'm not a law person. So what I will see is that the confidence that these pension contributors, i.e. the TUC, will have in the financial system will go down. Okay? So you may have the first tier, second tier being mandatory, but the third tier, you may not get funds going in that regard because that becomes discretionary to the contributor.
Right.
So effectively, you're going to have that kind of confidence going down. To some extent, you know, if you allow the TUC to have their way, right, they will tell you that they will not put their money in, pensions again. But by law, they are restricted to do so.
Right.
So effectively, well, they can threaten the industrial action, but I can tell you that per the regulations we have, and remember, there's regulatory authorities, the pensions, the NIC and all those, you know, they are more or less pseudo government machinery. And at the end of the day, you know, they can easily be influenced, you know. So I can tell you that, yes, they may go ahead with their industrial action, but if government wants to go ahead, they can go ahead. But government needs to realize this. The whole financial system, which, you know, we understand that money must move from one point to the other, hinges on trust and it hinges on contract. So if you disrespect counterparty contract, you end up breaking your financial system.
Is this debt exchange going to do that? Is it going to reduce the trust
what I'm saying.
in the system?
If the government decide not to engage the counterparty, which in this case, the labor front, it will end up breaking the financial system. The trust will be gone. And then the last lattice that we've been enjoying to move money from one point to the other will be broken.
Let me bring in Ken Chinebua Kodua. This stance that you have adopted has ruffled some feathers, and you're saying that you're going to stick to it, at least per what we heard yesterday, pending what discussions will be held today. We also know what the implications could be on an IMF program. With the sort of explanations that have been given up to this point, don't they suffice in terms of watering down what your expectations are of this debt exchange program? Please unmute if you can hear me.
What has been... yes.
Did you get the question?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. What has been professed so far has been public discussions. Government hasn't come up to make any pronouncement on how it intends to address this concern. Public discussions, yes, we understand. And let's not say that TUC doesn't understand or appreciate what it will impact if pension incomes are exempted. We have done our own studies as a labor institution, and we feel that there could be some arrangements to have the pension. After all these IMF arrangements to get 3 billion cedis for this country is to help the ordinary Ghanaian, isn't it? So why do we bring in policies now that will seek to add more burden to the people we are trying to?
So your major beef, the thorny issue, is the fact that you were not engaged. But in the end, the outcome is the same, whether you were engaged or not. I'm not saying that it wasn't important for you to be engaged, but does that mean that now that engagement is going to happen, you'll be willing to go along?
No. Our position on pension income is a no-no. How did government resolve the banking crisis? They found a way around it when they engaged. There could be other ways of looking at safeguarding pension income.
Like what? Like what?
See, when IMF says that it will not support countries in distress, you ask yourself, what is distress? Is it that countries are burdened in terms of debt expenditure? Is it that countries are not generating enough income? If it's about enough income to support the system, let's discuss that issue and see to what extent can income freeze the component of pension income. If it's about getting expenditure to come down, to get a space to freeze pension income, let's discuss it. But if you choose not to discuss it at all and assume that, but for pension income, this whole structural adjustment would be affected, that is quite
so I have
illogical.
I have a concern, because you're saying in one breath that we would have wanted engagement before we got to this point. But in another breath, you are suggesting that whether you engage me or not, I'm going to say no anyway. So, I mean, it's a lose-lose situation for government from that angle.
But currently, as we speak, even as Labour, we don't know the promises government has made to IMF. Disclosure of information is also a problem. We have nothing to study and even help us to even that. All we know is the quantum of our pension income and its impact on the ordinary Ghanaian who is saving his money towards retirement. But if it's about alternative ways, then we can sit down and see what other measures can be done to get this IMF program still ongoing, even though TUC, we have our own issue on IMF. If it's about just the pension income exemption, let's look at it and see what can replace that in the equation. But government has held all the information to its chest.
Right.
And we don't have anything to even look at.
So you're basically saying you're not clothed with enough information to even look at the alternatives because you've not been engaged. And when you are engaged, then you can give the options rather than affecting your pension funds. That's what you're saying.
Yes, that could help.
So hopefully today, when that engagement happens, you would bring some of these to bear, right?
It's different calling us to tell us what you... Engagement means that you don't have a predetermined position. But the way it stands now, you have a position communicated to all the parties. Are you engaging us to tell us that I have done this? Or you're engaging us on a clean sheet for us to put new inputs into the equation and see how we can resolve this issue?
Share with me before... Right before I get to Mr. Boakye on some of the labor issues, I just want to find out. So, quote, your Secretary General, Dr. Yao said yesterday, all workers must be ready to participate fully in any industrial action to protect our pension funds. Workers will no longer bear the consequences of any IMF-inspired or IMF-sponsored policies and programs. Government is responsible for its decisions, including the decision to seek an IMF bailout. But guess what? We are government. We elect these people to represent us. They are acting in our stead. We don't have a choice. Not all of us can rule. Is this not a bit... I'm looking for the right word. I don't want to say selfish or self-seeking, but everyone falling under that umbrella will be hit. Why is the TUC alone crying foul?
Are you sure everyone falling under this will be hit?
Apart from the few individuals who are bondholders, and we know that is a very small number. So all of those in that catchment area, pension funds, everybody contributing will be hit.
Yes, but must it always be the case that when it comes to IMF entering Ghana, all the policies it seeks to bring ends up making the Ghanaian worker worse off? Those in politics, currently, you know them. People leave public service today, they join politics. What they acquire in the 4 years, 5 years of their service is enough to safeguard their pension for 50 years. The poor worker should be the one who should always bear IMF. Look at the budget for 2023. It seeks to perhaps promote investors, getting confidence, getting people to have confidence in the country. That is fine. But must that go to also bury the employer, say that you are freezing employment? After training your children through school, spending on them all these years, they finish and they come and join the unemployment class, depending on parents now whose salaries are already meager. All the policies in the budget seeks to look at the external, and it's about time we look at the internal. We're not being selfish as TUC. All we are saying is that we can achieve our goals minus pension income. And we must sit down and look at how we can sit down and restructure whatever it is to achieve our set goals.
All right.
Again, let me add, the VAT element that has been introduced in the budget, which seeks to enhance revenue, the question we must ask ourselves is this: is government putting in enough measures to ensure that the VAT that you and I pay comes back to the government through GRA? We saw GRA try to get businesses pay the right VAT through the current field vigilation they were doing. We saw the backlash. Government said, please stop. So on one breath, you want revenue to distress. On the other breath, you are not encouraging those same institutions to go out there and bring in the needed revenue to limit some of this bed. So I can summarize and say that TUC has always been negotiating and engaging. But if you choose not to come and sit down for us to look at how we can exempt pension income and find other sources to fill that gap, then we'll not sit down to be imposed upon. And members,
give me a 15-second answer. If pensions are simply not going to be able to be exempted, what will the TUC do? What will you do?
We have made our intentions quite clear.
Industrial actions?
What it could take any other form, including industrial actions, to the extent that the same confidence that we want to have externally could also be the real. But it's not selfish. It's about ensuring that IMF conditions are situated in our context, not swallowed the way it seeks to do now.
Okay, let me just bring in Mr. Boakye on this little beat. So I have two questions, maybe just this one. What are the intricacies involved? Because it's a very slippery slope. The pension holders have their own interests. There's the government and where we've ended, and the national interest. First off, is the TUC right in positioning itself this way? And from the labor end, what could be the consequences? Then, if it insists going down this road, as a labor person, what could be the consequences of saying on that, Mr. Boakye?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that, let me start with your second question. I think that we don't have to go that road, whatever it is.
No, but the question is, can they go down that road legally from the labor perspective? Is it a possibility? Can they push this? How far can they push this?
I said that they have the right to say that, look, because you've done this to us, we are withdrawing our services. They have the right to do that, provided they go through, the law, as is prescribed by the current labor law. They can do that. But the fact of the matter is that they should be prevented from doing that.
When you say they should be prevented, what do you mean?
Oh, what they want is engagement. I've said it earlier, that the statement they put out there is an invitation to some level of discussion.
What they want, in essence, they've said they wanted to be engaged earlier, but if you listen to Mr. Kodia, he made it clear it's to find a way of going round pension funds, not touching pension funds. If I am correct, I think that is what they want. It's not about just talking. They want pension funds exempted. That's what they want.
That is what they want. But government also wants pension funds, included. So what it poses to us is two separate positions which must be discussed and then come to some level of compromise. I don't think that the union will stick to their guns if they are engaged and allow the whole process to be derailed. I don't think they will do that. If government comes, that is what Mr. Kodia said, if they come and give them all the information they need, these guys are also quite knowledgeable. They will then go into the real issues, discuss the issues, and come up with something that, both parties could actually go in sync into. Because don't forget that it's a political institution. They also go through elections. So if you sit there at the top and you do things without consulting the rank and file, you have a huge task going into your next elections, just like the politicians do. So they are protecting their jobs as well. They are protecting the interests of their members. I don't think that it is too difficult to call for the government to engage them and go through the issues even today.
So as far as the TUC is concerned, what is being done is legitimate.
In terms of?
In terms of the actions, in terms of their positioning, first of all, that they don't want pension funds included, in terms of the basis that they've stated that it will bring them undue hardship, in terms of the consequences, which could include industrial action.
Yeah, they are saying this because they do not have the full, disclosure to deal with. So if you call them and say that, okay, this is why we did this, it involves A, B, C, D. In fact, the whole domestic debt exchange, for me, is premised on discussions. You cannot just come and, issue a statement and say, this is what we are doing. I believe that in the first place, the discussions they had with the statutory bodies were necessary, but they should have sent that further down, okay, to the stakeholders themselves, for them to also have a say in how this whole thing should emerge.
Right.
Okay. So if it has not happened, for me, it is not too late. They can still do it. If they are invited for a discussion today, I am sure that by tomorrow their story will be different. It will not be the same story.
All right. Just to wrap my batch of questions for you, gentlemen, Bernice will continue from here, and then maybe we'll wrap up at the end. I'll come through with a few more thoughts. I'd just like to find out from you, Mr. Boakye. So, on the basis of what we know now, the failure of government to have engaged these entities is known to be a mistake that could have been avoided. As a labor consultant, what are some of the other mistakes that you have seen in this process that could have been avoided, that could have prevented us from getting here?
For instance, I believe that the government could have come up with a tacit statement saying that this is what we are going to do, generally, without going into the nitty-gritties, the details. Okay, so that after you've spoken to all your stakeholders, you come out with what you really want to do. Because if you do this, and Mr. Kodia have said that already, it means you have taken a position, and so even if you are inviting me, it is just to tell me that this is what I want to do. Right. And for me, that is not good faith exercise.
Thank you, Mr. Boakye.
Back to you, Professor Lord Mensah. Your colleague, Professor Godfred Bopping, has been speaking on the debt exchange program. He is predicting more forms of debt exchange in the coming days. He believes that what we are discussing now is just the first phase of a series of measures. He mentions that government will implement exchange with non-tradable debts and make other adjustments. Can you just explain to us further what that will mean? Hello, Professor Lord Mensah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but then I think my video...
Yes, there's a problem.
The host has taken the video from me.
Sorry, so, we'll try and rectify that, but we can still hear you, so you can still go ahead with your response if you heard my question.
Yes, can you come up with your question again, please?
Yes, I'm saying that your colleague, Professor Godfred Bopping, has been saying that there will be more forms of debt exchange in the coming weeks. Are you aware of anything like that? Do you know anything like that?
Well, I'm not aware of anything of that sort.
Okay, so he tells us that government's next step will be to implement exchange with non-tradable debts and make adjustments. Yeah. If that goes through, what would it mean? And if you can, explain what that will mean, an exchange with non-tradable debts.
I think non-tradable debt, to some extent, more or less having an equity in the country's revenue proceeds. I can tell you that for you to exchange your tradable debt with non-tradable one, i.e., these are debts that you cannot put on the market. So I don't know how the government will go about it, because the essence of investment is to make sure that you get your return. So probably a non-tradable debt will be maybe having a stake, maybe in one of the state assets or something. In the end, that will be part of your debt. So for instance, if you own a bond, then maybe the state can exchange it with maybe proceeds from, let's say, Ghana Airport's, Terminal 3, or we can say that it will be maybe proceeds from, Tema Port and Harbor, or maybe whatever, asset the state has. In that case, you cannot put the asset on the market, but then you still enjoy your proceeds. But that would be too extreme. If it turns out to be that kind of debt exchange government will be looking out for, then of course the country is more or less coming to a halt. Right. Because at the end of the day, it will turn up that management of the economy has failed completely. In the end, whatever money they raise through bonds and other things cannot be used judiciously, and therefore they may want creditors to come and take over some of the state assets that are non-tradable. Right. So effectively, that is what it means. It happened in Zambia, and I think that would be an extreme situation, for this country.
But Prof, if Labour gets government to heed its demand of not using pensions for the debt exchange program, could this be a possibility for government? We are yet to hear from government on this. It's Professor Bopping who is predicting it, but could that be a possibility?
Well, then in that case, that could be a possibility. Like I said, it happened in somewhere in Zambia, where foreign creditors have come to take over some key assets in their country, like their airport and all those, just to reap their money back and then give the asset back to the state. That would be an extreme. I don't know, maybe whether my colleague professor is looking at our external debt and how some of the possible debt restructuring negotiations that we are about to go into will end up. So effectively, but for the locals, like what we have with our pensions now, it is easier. And as we are all, calling for, to ensure that at least there should be an engagement. But for our foreign debt, there's a likelihood that we can get to that extreme. It's possible. it's possible. We can't rule that out.
Interesting. Back to you, Mr. Trinibua Kodia. Have you, let me just ask this very simple question. Have you lost confidence in this government?
Obviously not. Obviously not. We elected this government, and we feel that with the right processes, we can all govern or contribute to govern this country so it becomes what we all desire it to be. But I must also add that government's inability to have stakeholders discuss national issues, not only on this debt restructuring, but on major policies that affect the Ghanaian worker, is becoming consistently unacceptable. It cannot be that policies that are geared towards enhancing the ordinary Ghanaian are discussed without getting the stakeholders involved. It is our belief that if government would open its doors wider for inputs from all stakeholders on national issues, perhaps we can find some solutions to some of the issues. But IMF issues, if you check the history of IMF in Ghana, you would always find, my sister, that in as much as it tries to get our debt issues resolved and also build investor confidence, it brings some harsh blows on a section of the population. And we must begin to look at it, how we can get IMF programs done in this country. I hope there's no more, there won't be any more IMF program in the future. But done in a way that fits our progress and context as a country. The way it comes to distort virtually everything. Then we build again up to a point. Then we go back to IMF. Then we destroy all that we have built, and that cycle must stop.
Right. My final question to you, and back to you, Professor Lord Mensah. On the front page of the Economic Times, the big story, the BOG spends $5.6 billion in debt servicing and others. And let me just bring you some details. So according to the Governor, Dr. Ernest Addison, we've experienced an outflow of $5.6 billion to date, and that's the extent of pressure on the central bank's reserves because we have to pay for our loans. And so yesterday, Prof, we heard from former Finance Minister Seth Terkper, who raised concerns about the BOG and the pressure on the BOG as a result of what we are trying to do to save our economic mess. What are your concerns about this, and what is the likely impact?
Yeah, well, obviously, BOG serves as the bank for the government. And so whatever debt obligations the government has, is a BOG that must settle it. Of course, you know, at the end of the day, whatever inflows that is coming into our folds through our export and all those, the same BOG that must, you know, settle it. And the government, the BOG also has the mandate of ensuring that we enjoy some price stability and then some kind of, you know, monetary, easiness. But the BOG hasn't got control over the fiscal side of, you know, our economic management. And that is where the problem is. The link between the monetary management of our economy and the fiscal side, which has to do with how we spend and all those. So there will be pressure on BOG because they don't have control over, you know, the way we spend into our policies and how it builds up back into the economy, the kind of revenue we must generate in relation to this, you know, expenditure. So it's something that, you know, there will be pressure. But I think over time, we are all going through process and we are learning. And I believe that these structures that we've been proposing, the link between the BOG, which has the mandate to ensure that at the monetary front, we are stable, we'll have that kind of relationship with the fiscal side, which is the finance minister's side, to ensure that, you know, the economy grows in a direction that is expected. But in effect, there is pressure. And of course, the BOG keeps the reserves of the government. And what is interesting is that because the Eurobond market has been priced out of Ghana, you know, Ghana has been priced out of the market. So we cannot go there to raise the dollar again to offset existing debt. And as a result of that, whatever dollar we have or the reserves that we have, government must eat into it to pay off its obligations that are in foreign currency. So effectively, it's challenging. And I do admit that there will be pressure on the central bank as we speak. Right.
So just by way of information, and especially on the importance of running a successful debt exchange program, he says that on the next pay slips, we've lost from the balance of payment almost $3.4 billion to September, and we are projecting that we could even lose more by December this year. We could have lost $4 billion US. Again, if we are successful with the restructuring operations, a burden of balance of payment in terms of interest payment, external interest payment, would also be lifted. So we do not expect to see the same type of outflows as we are seeing this year. So that's just by way of information on why it's important for us to run a successful debt exchange program. Benjamin.
Back to you, Prof, as we wind down on this conversation. So I have three very quick points I want you to look at. The first has to do with investors in dollar-denominated, investments and how they are expected to take a 30% haircut on the principal amounts that they have invested. Is this going to drive away such investors, especially as we are looking at the fact that, interestingly, we have had the precarious situation where about 40% of our local debt or domestic debt has been held by foreign investors. We know about a third of that is owned by the commercial banks. But this year, somehow we're being told that by Bloomberg that it will fall down to about 10%. what are the dynamics on those, putting those two issues together? And lastly, today that negotiation with the IMF is going to be concluded. Whether we'll get a staff level agreement or not, we do not know. What are your expectations, Prof?
Okay, so for every investor, once the expectations of the investor is not met, obviously there will be a reaction. And the investor came into an investment or may want to go into an investment with a certain expectation. So if it turns out that I'm supposed to enjoy, this is just a scenario, 20% of my investment, and you end up giving me 10%, you've not met my expectation. And obviously my confidence in you will go down. And if I'm a new investor and I'm coming into your environment and there's a history of that sort where investors put in their money into the government folds and they end up not receiving the coupons or the returns that are expected, obviously I will react and I will shy away from your kind of packages or investment that you put out there. So I will say that yes, it's going to affect investor confidence, and that is the hallmark of any economy that is struggling. Every economy that is struggling, investors tend to shy away from that economy generally. So I would say that yes, indeed, it will have impact on investor confidence. With the expectations on the IMF and then the government's engagement, I can tell you that government should have done a lot of homework before engaging this the IMF visitors. But looking at what is on the ground, if we should go by the reactions that the government has been receiving since it announced this exchange program, I can tell you that the IMF will be ready to give the government more time to engage the public before they come back for another meeting. So it will be an announcement that will not necessarily give a concrete kind of outcome to say that probably government has gotten staff level agreement with the IMF. Probably they may agree on staff level agreement, but they will give the government more time to engage its people or investors before they come up with another level of negotiations.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Mensah, for having joined the conversation. Of course, he is with the University of Ghana Business School. To wrap up the conversation with Mr. Boakye and Mr. Kodia, it's interesting because I've been looking at this text message, the second time I'm getting it, and this is my Tier 2 pension, has been inviting me to a discussion, guess what, on the debt exchange and the impact on pensions. I'll start with you, Mr. Kodia. So what is the way forward? What next for the TUC, especially as Guta has also been calling on you to also let go of this stance and maybe just allow sleeping dogs to lie. According to this bit that I'm looking at, they are lauding government's efforts at stabilizing the value of the Ghana cedi, but they also have their concerns about the stance you're putting up. What is your take? Quick reactions as we end.
Okay. TUC, obviously, we have the national interest, and the measures government is currently pursuing to stabilize the economy and our financial issues are issues that obviously we all have interest in. Our issue has been that a portion of that measures would further cause some difficulty that can be avoided if the whole equation is really looked at. And that's all we are saying, that we want to achieve whatever we all will have to do to get this economy running. But a portion of that process should be really re-examined. And that is all that TUC seeks to do. And I believe that if that is done in all fairness and in good faith, I'm sure we can get this process running without any disruptions.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Trinibua Kodia, Vice Chairman of the TUC. Let me wrap with Mr. Boakye. What do you see to be the way forward in this entire development?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the way forward has already been stated. I think the government must open the window for discussion. And I am sure that knowing the union movement, if there's that opportunity provided, they will shape their stance.
It's interesting you say window, but it would then mean that the door had been shut and now a window must be opened for something to happen. Of course, that was also Yadom Boache Amponsa, a labor consultant who joined the conversation. Quite a conversation we've had there, but it is clear that from the standpoint of labor, I heard that very forcefully. Don't keep on implementing policies, programs, when you've not engaged us. I don't know whether those at the helm of affairs will listen, but I felt that.
Yeah, and I can remember clearly the number of times we've engaged different.
We don't have to go far.
Talk
The
about
e-levy
NAT, talk
is
about
one of them.
UTAG, talk about all these other labor unions and organizations that have consistently said that you can't keep doing this to us. And that's what prompted my question about whether TUC had lost confidence in this government and its ability to deal with some of these matters. Well, the answer was that no, we haven't lost confidence, but we would hope that these things do not continue happening. We've got our fingers crossed. This morning, we are being told that we will be hearing from the Finance Ministry and the IMF on exactly where we've reached with our IMF negotiations. So you do want to stay with us here on the Joy News channel. We will update you on that. But for now, we'll take a quick breather. When we come back, Benjamin, Christmas is approaching. We're in the season already, but Christmas Day and all the festivities that come with it, they're fast approaching. But the Road Safety Authority is concerned. We want you to stay safe during this festive season. When we come back, we'll be talking a lot more about that. Do stay.